Juan Reyes, a quiet yet brilliant 15-year-old from a humble background, steps into the prestigious halls of Luntian High, eager to prove himself. But his dreams are quickly overshadowed by Ms. Delgado, a tough, no-nonsense math teacher who dismisses him before he even has a chance. Despite the prejudice and constant undermining, Juan isn't just a student, he's a force of nature in disguise. With nothing but his passion for math and the support of his friends, Juan sets out to challenge the system, turning the tables in a way no one saw coming. But will his determination be enough to break through? Luntian High School, nestled in the heart of Manila, was a place where only the best thrived. The school's imposing brick walls and meticulously kept grounds reflected its reputation for excellence. Known for its competitive academic programs, Luntian High attracted the brightest students from all over the city. The campus buzzed with the energy of students discussing the latest academic trends, athletic achievements, and upcoming school events. For many, it was a place where futures were shaped, but for Juan Reyes, it was an intimidating mountain he was determined to climb. At 15 years old, Juan had always been a quiet and hard-working student. His love for mathematics had been a constant in his life, a beacon of stability in a world of challenges. He wasn't the loudest voice in class, but his mind was sharp, and his ability to solve complex equations had earned him recognition in his old school. However, Luntian High was a different beast entirely. The students here were fiercely competitive, many coming from families with greater resources. But Juan wasn't deterred. As he walked through the gates of the school on his first day, the weight of the moment hit him. The air was thick with anticipation, and the vibrant chatter of students around him made his heart race. His mother, Luz Reyes, had worked tirelessly for years, taking double shifts at the local hospital to ensure Juan could attend a school that would help him achieve his dream of earning a scholarship to university. Luz had always told Juan that education was the key to breaking free from their struggles, and he knew this was his chance to prove her sacrifices weren't in vain. His mother had always been his rock, steady and loving, despite the long hours she spent at work. When they had moved into their modest apartment in Manila, it was with the promise of a better future, one where Juan could attend a prestigious school like Luntian High. Her words of encouragement still echoed in his mind as he walked to his first class. "You've got this, anak. You make us proud every day." Juanito knew his mother's sacrifices weren't just for him to receive an education, they were for a chance at a better life. This made the pressure even heavier. As he passed through the crowded halls, he couldn't help but feel the weight of expectation. Every student seemed so confident, so sure of themselves. They were dressed in crisp uniforms, their backpacks filled with textbooks that had that fresh smell of new knowledge. Juan's own backpack felt heavy on his shoulders, but not from the weight of his textbooks. It was the weight of his dreams. His first class was advanced mathematics. This was the class he had worked so hard to get into, the class where he could prove his talent and make a real difference. He had always excelled in math, but he knew this class would test him in ways he hadn't experienced before. The teacher, Ms. Maria Delgado, had a reputation for being demanding and unforgiving. He had heard rumors from older students about her tough standards and her no-nonsense approach to teaching. Juanito wasn't sure what to expect, but as he entered room 301, the sight of the chalkboard, the neat rows of desks, and the intimidating stack of textbooks made him feel small. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and chose a seat near the middle, determined to make the most of this opportunity. This was his fresh start, but as the bell rang and Ms. Delgado entered the room, the tension in the air became palpable. The tall, poised teacher gave the class a brief nod before writing the course objectives on the board. Her eyes scanned the room, but when they landed on Juan, there was a flicker of something he couldn't quite place, something that made his stomach tighten. He wasn't sure if it was his imagination or if he had actually caught the briefest moment of doubt in her eyes, but he could feel her gaze lingering just a moment too long. For a split second, Juan felt an unfamiliar sensation, one that was hard to shake off. Was he being judged even before the class had begun? The bell rang sharply, signaling the start of Juan's first class at Luntian High. As Ms. Maria Delgado strode into the room, her presence immediately commanded attention. Tall, with a stern expression and a no-nonsense posture, she was everything Juan had heard about, and more. Her reputation preceded her. A teacher known for her unwavering commitment to excellence and her tendency to push students to their absolute limits. She was the kind of teacher who expected perfection, and there was no room for failure in her classroom. Ms. Delgado's eyes swept across the students, pausing only briefly before she began writing the syllabus on the board. When her gaze landed on Juan, she didn't smile. In fact, there was a flicker of something, perhaps hesitation or judgment, that passed across her face, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. She then proceeded to hand out the placement tests, her movements sharp and efficient. When she reached Juan, she dropped the test onto his desk without a word. The way she did it made him feel as though he were invisible, as though his presence was an afterthought. The other students around him received their tests with a few encouraging words. "Good luck, I'm sure you'll do fine." But to Juan, there was nothing. Her cool tone and brief gesture made it clear he wasn't one of the chosen. Juan looked down at the paper, his heart sinking for a moment. It was as if Ms. Delgado had already made up her mind about him without even knowing him. The test was a rigorous one, full of questions that challenged even the brightest students, and yet he felt like his abilities were already being dismissed. He glanced around the room, watching as students with more privileged backgrounds dressed in the latest fashion, their names whispered among the school's elite, flipped open their test papers confidently. But Juan, despite the cold reception, wasn't ready to back down. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. This was his moment. He wouldn't let one teacher's dismissive attitude define him. He knew his worth, his love for mathematics, and his ability to excel. As the class settled into the test, Juan focused on each question with precision, determined to show Ms. Delgado and everyone else that he wasn't someone to be overlooked. This was just the beginning. The weeks that followed Juan's first encounter with Ms. Maria Delgado were filled with tension. Every day in her advanced mathematics class seemed like a test, not just of his intellectual abilities, but of his resilience. Ms. Delgado's dismissive attitude toward him became more apparent with each passing lesson. She never openly acknowledged his efforts or his questions. Whenever he raised his hand to offer an answer or point out a discrepancy in her work on the board, she would glance over him, only to call on a student from the more well-known, wealthier families of the class. One day, during a lesson on integral calculus, Ms. Delgado made an error while explaining a complex formula. Juan hesitated watching her, knowing that if the mistake went uncorrected, many students would likely become confused. He raised his hand, and she looked at him with a sharp, almost imperceptible frown. "Yes, Mr. Reyes?" she asked, her tone cool, as if the very act of him interrupting her lesson was an imposition. "I think there's a mistake in the second step," Juan said carefully. "The derivative of the function should be negative, not positive, because of the way we're approaching the curve." He pointed to the board, where her written solution showed an inconsistency that would cause the entire formula to unravel. Ms. Delgado looked at the board for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. She erased the equation and rewrote it, but said nothing in response to Juan's correction. No acknowledgement, not a word of praise for his sharp observation or for the fact that he had caught an error in a lesson that many students found challenging. She simply moved on as if the mistake hadn't mattered, and neither had Juan's input. The students around him exchanged furtive glances, whispering among themselves. Juan could feel their eyes on him, and the unspoken tension hung in the air. He wondered if they were thinking what he feared, that Miss Delgado's disdain for him wasn't just a matter of his abilities, but a matter of his background. He was aware that his classmates came from wealthier families, their lives often easier than his own. Many of them had attended private schools, had tutors, or had access to resources he could only dream of. They seemed to sail through the material with ease, their families having already paved the way for their success. Juan didn't let it show, but his stomach churned. He had learned from his mother that in life there would always be people who doubted him, who underestimated his worth. Luz Reyes had taught him that the only way to rise above that doubt was through hard work, dignity, and perseverance. When things got tough, when he was told he couldn't do something or wasn't good enough, he needed to hold his head high and show through action that he was capable of achieving greatness. At night, when he sat at his small desk at home surrounded by books and papers, Juan would remember his mother's words. She had worked tirelessly for years, pulling double shifts at the hospital just to provide for him, all with the hope that he would one day achieve what she had never been able to, a chance at a better future. He couldn't afford to let her sacrifices go to waste. He would prove them wrong, prove Ms. Delgado wrong. As the days turned into weeks, Juan pushed himself harder than ever. He didn't just study the assigned material, he went beyond it. He borrowed textbooks from the public library, read ahead in calculus, and worked on solving problems that no one in his class was even tackling. He began to teach himself advanced integration techniques and differential equations, areas that were usually reserved for college students. While his classmates chatted about their weekends, their shopping sprees, or the latest trends, Juan's mind was consumed with numbers, equations, and proofs. Each time he solved a problem that felt particularly challenging, he felt a surge of pride. It wasn't just about the mathematics, it was about proving to himself that he could do it, despite the odds stacked against him. He found comfort in the structure of math, the logical certainty it offered. Unlike the world outside, where things were often dictated by bias, wealth, and influence, math was a level playing field. The numbers didn't care who you were, where you came from, or how much money your family had. In math, there was always a clear right answer. Juan would often find himself in the library after school, long after most of the other students had gone home. He sat in silence, flipping through textbooks, jotting down notes and solving problems. His hands would ache after hours of writing, but he didn't mind. Every equation he conquered made him feel like he was getting closer to something bigger. He wasn't just learning to solve math problems. He was learning to defy the limits others had set for him. Occasionally, his classmates noticed his increasing expertise. Maya Santos, the quiet but determined girl who had joined his study group, was one of the first to comment on his dedication. "Juan, you're always so focused," she said one afternoon, leaning over his shoulder in the library. "I wish I could be as disciplined as you." Juan smiled at her, grateful for her words. "It's just math. You just have to keep practicing until it clicks," he replied. Maya wasn't the only one who began to notice Juan's dedication. Even some of the students who once ignored him began asking for his help, especially when their grades started slipping, or when they couldn't understand the more complicated problems. Juan's quiet reputation as the math prodigy began to spread, and with it, the small study group he had formed started to grow. However, Ms. Delgado continued to make things difficult for him. During class, she would often pass over his raised hand, as if she hadn't seen it at all, choosing instead to call on students she seemed to prefer. She would assign Juan tasks or problems that felt almost like tests of his abilities, challenging him in ways that felt more like an obstacle than an opportunity. But Juan didn't let it shake him. He was more determined than ever to prove himself, not to her, but to everyone who thought he didn't belong. Each new hurdle only fueled his desire to succeed. And as Juan walked into Ms. Delgado's class each day, he knew that this wasn't just about math anymore. It was about something much bigger. He wasn't just learning formulas. He was learning how to fight for a place where he could truly belong, to stand up against the biases and prejudices that sought to define him before. He had a chance to prove his worth. It wasn't long before Mr. Ricardo Cruz, the compassionate science teacher at Luntian High, began to notice the growing unease in Juan. Unlike the cold indifference of Ms. Delgado, Mr. Cruz had a warmth about him that immediately put students at ease. A long-time educator at the school, he had a reputation for being a patient mentor who took the time to help students both inside and outside of the classroom. When he saw Juan sitting alone in the back of the classroom after school one day, working diligently through a pile of math problems, he decided it was time to step in. "Juan," Mr. Cruz said softly, approaching the young student, "I've been watching you work. You've got a lot of potential, but I can tell you're carrying a heavy load." Juan looked up, momentarily startled. He hadn't expected any teacher to acknowledge his presence, let alone offer help. But there was something about Mr. Cruz's approach, gentle, sincere, that made Juan feel he could trust him. "I'm fine, sir. Just trying to stay ahead of the curve," Juan replied, not wanting to admit the truth. He didn't want to sound like he was complaining, especially since he had been trying so hard to prove himself. Mr. Cruz studied him for a moment, recognizing the strain in Juan's eyes. "I know what it's like to feel like you're being overlooked, but the effort you're putting in isn't going unnoticed." He paused. "If you ever need some guidance, I'm here. You don't have to do it alone." Those words meant more to Juan than he let on. They were a lifeline, a quiet affirmation that not everyone in the school saw him as the outsider. Mr. Cruz gave him a knowing nod before walking away, and Juan felt a small flicker of hope ignite within him. In the following days, Juan began to take Mr. Cruz up on his offer. He would stop by his office after school for guidance, and the teacher's mentorship helped him refine his understanding of difficult concepts in both science and math. Mr. Cruz was patient with Juan, never rushing him, and always offering encouragement. It wasn't long before Juan began to feel more confident in his abilities, but more importantly, Mr. Cruz made him feel seen and valued. With newfound encouragement, Juan decided to take the next step and form a study group with a few classmates. He reached out to Maya Santos, a bright but reserved student who often struggled with math, and some others who had shown interest in his work but lacked the same focus. Maya, in particular, had always admired Juan's dedication, but found herself easily overwhelmed by the complexity of the lessons. "I've been watching you, Juan," Maya said one day after class, a mixture of admiration and curiosity in her eyes. "You make math look so easy. I want to understand it like you do. Can you help me?" Juan smiled, appreciative of her honesty. "Of course, Maya. We can do this together." The study group quickly began to take shape, with students from different backgrounds gathering around Juan. Every afternoon, after the final bell, they would meet in the library or the quiet corners of the school courtyard. Over time, their collective understanding of mathematics deepened. Juan found satisfaction in sharing his knowledge with others, and Maya's confidence grew as she began solving problems she had once thought impossible. Despite the positive results, Ms. Delgado's undermining tactics continued. Whenever Juan led the study group, she would ignore his contributions in class or subtly belittle his efforts. There was always the implication that his success was due to outside help, as though his abilities were somehow unearned. When Juan earned a perfect score on a surprise pop quiz, her frustration was palpable. In front of the entire class, Ms. Delgado publicly questioned his integrity. "Juanito Reyes," she said coldly, "I see you've done quite well on this quiz, but perhaps you've received some outside assistance. It's highly unusual for someone from your background to perform this well without extra help." The accusation was a dagger to Juan's heart. He had worked tirelessly for that perfect score, and to have it questioned in front of the class was both humiliating and unfair. The whispers started almost immediately. Some students exchanged skeptical looks, while others seemed uncomfortable with the tension in the room, but Juan remained calm. He had learned from his mother that the best response to unfairness was to meet it with dignity and grace. He didn't raise his voice, didn't let the indignity of the moment overwhelm him. Instead, he simply stood up and walked toward the front of the room. "I can explain my answers if you'd like, Miss Delgado," Juan said, his voice steady. "I didn't cheat. I've been studying on my own and pushing myself to understand the material just like everyone else." He turned to the board and began explaining his answers methodically, breaking down each step and showing the class the process he had used to arrive at his results. His calm, logical explanation made it clear to everyone watching that his success wasn't the result of cheating. It was the product of hard work and dedication. As he finished, he turned to Ms. Delgado. "I'd be happy to explain the rest of the quiz to anyone who has questions," Juan added, his voice unwavering. He could feel the eyes of his classmates on him, but he stood tall, refusing to let their judgment or Ms. Delgado's hostility shake his confidence. Ms. Delgado didn't respond immediately. Her eyes narrowed as she processed what had just happened. She was likely upset that Juan had not only challenged her accusation, but had also used the situation as a teaching moment for the class. Her silence spoke volumes, but the rest of the class seemed to understand that Juan had done nothing wrong. They had witnessed the situation unfold and knew he was only trying to help everyone understand the material better. From that moment on, Juan's study group flourished. The students who had once been hesitant to approach him now sought his help openly. Maya's confidence skyrocketed as she mastered new concepts, and others began showing up to their sessions. Word spread throughout the school about the math prodigy who had turned an unfair accusation into a triumph, and the group grew larger each week. Despite Ms. Delgado's continued resistance, the study group became a community of support. Juan found himself not only teaching math, but also leading a movement to prove that excellence, hard work, and integrity couldn't be denied, no matter the circumstances. And in doing so, he was shaping not just his own future, but the future of those around him. Though the road ahead would be full of obstacles, Juan knew he had the strength to face them, especially with the support of Mr. Cruz and his growing circle of allies. The lesson on differential equations was one of the most challenging yet. Miss Delgado had been moving quickly through the material, her voice sharp and commanding as she explained the intricacies of calculus. The class struggled to keep up, their notebooks filled with half-finished equations and scribbled attempts to follow her fast-paced explanations. Juan, however, had already been through these topics before, having studied ahead. He had always been a fast learner, but today something caught his eye that sent a shiver of concern through him. As Ms. Delgado wrote out a particularly difficult solution to a problem involving integration by parts, Juan noticed a significant error. She had miscalculated one of the variables, and the entire step that followed was based on that mistake. Juan's heart raced. This error, if not corrected, would confuse every student in the class and derail their understanding of the concept. Juan glanced around at his classmates, watching as they scrambled to follow the solution. He felt the pressure of the moment, but also knew that this was a chance for him to help, not just for his own benefit, but for everyone in the class. He couldn't let this mistake stand. With a deep breath, he raised his hand, his palm flat. Against the desk, Miss Delgado's eyes flicked in his direction, but she didn't immediately call on him. Her hand paused mid-air, holding the chalk as if she already knew what was coming. "Yes, Mr. Reyes?" Ms. Delgado said, her voice tight with impatience. Juan stood up, walking toward the board where Ms. Delgado had written the error. "I believe there's a mistake in step 3, Ms. Delgado," he said respectfully. "The derivative should be negative, not positive, because the function's curve is concave downward. It's a simple sign error." A hush fell over the classroom. Every student turned their attention toward Juan, their pens frozen mid-sentence. Miss Delgado's gaze darkened, and for a moment, Juan thought he saw a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. Without waiting for her response, he continued, "If you adjust the sign here, the entire solution will work out correctly." He pointed to the spot on the board where the error had occurred, his finger steady and sure. The room was silent, and Juan felt the weight of all those eyes on him. Ms. Delgado didn't respond immediately, but her body stiffened. She put the chalk down slowly, turning to face Juan with a cool expression that masked the tension rising beneath the surface. "You've just disrespected me in front of the class, Mr. Reyes." Ms. Delgado's voice was calm but ice-cold. "Your behavior is out of line. You should not be questioning me like this. I've been teaching for years, and I'm certain of my methods." Juan's heart beat a little faster, but he held his ground. He had done nothing wrong. He wasn't trying to disrespect her. He was trying to help. "I'm sorry, Ms. Delgado, but I'm only trying to help us all understand the concept," Juan said, his tone polite but firm. "The error could confuse everyone if we don't fix." "It is." Ms. Delgado's eyes narrowed, her expression hardening further. "Enough, Mr. Reyes," she snapped. "I've had enough of your constant need to show off and question my authority. This is a classroom, not a place for you to undermine my teaching." The words stung, but Juan refused to back down. He knew what he had said was right. He wasn't challenging her out of arrogance. He was challenging her because he cared about the integrity of the lesson, but Ms. Delgado wasn't willing to acknowledge it that way. She grabbed his test papers from her desk, slamming them down in front. "Of him, you will fail this course," she threatened, her voice rising with anger. "I will see to it that you do. You've crossed the line today." The class went completely silent. No one dared to speak, the tension in the air almost suffocating. Juan stood motionless, his mind racing. He knew that confronting Ms. Delgado might have consequences, but he also knew he couldn't let this go unchecked. "I understand," Juan said quietly, his voice steady, almost calm. "But I stand by my explanation. I just want to get the right answer, for everyone here." He looked around the class, then at Ms. Delgado. "If I have to keep explaining to make sure no one's confused, I will." Ms. Delgado's face flushed, but she didn't say anything more. She simply nodded toward the door, dismissing him without another word. As Juan gathered his things, a knot of tension tightened in his stomach. His classmates were still looking at him, some with concern, others with uncertainty, but there was no time for hesitation. He had stood up for what was right, even if the consequences were yet to unfold. After the bell rang and the students began filing out of the classroom, Mr. Cruz appeared at Juan's side. His usual warm smile was replaced by a more serious expression, but his tone remained encouraging. "Juan," Mr. Cruz began, his voice low, "I saw what happened in there. You did the right thing, standing up for the truth, but I want you to be careful. Not everyone will appreciate your courage." Juan nodded, still feeling the weight of the confrontation. "I just wanted to help. I don't want to cause trouble, sir." "I know," Mr. Cruz said kindly, "but you need to document everything from now on. Every incident, every interaction. Ms. Delgado's behavior, it's not right, and I'll support you, but you need to make sure you're protected. Keep a record in case things get worse." Juan didn't reply immediately, but the gravity of Mr. Cruz's words settled over him. He realized that this was more than just a conflict with Ms. Delgado. It was a larger battle, one that he would have to fight on multiple fronts. As he walked away from Mr. Cruz's office, he felt more determined than ever. He wasn't just going to let someone's bias dictate his future. He would stand tall, document the truth, and continue to prove that excellence was more powerful than anyone's prejudice. The days following his confrontation with Ms. Delgado were some of the toughest Juan had faced. His heart still raced whenever he thought about the scathing words she had thrown at him in front of the entire class. But Juan wasn't one to back down, especially when he knew that he had done the right thing. With Mr. Cruz's advice echoing in his mind, Juan began documenting everything. Every interaction, every piece of feedback, and every subtle moment of unfair treatment, he wrote. It all down in a small notebook he kept hidden in his backpack. It wasn't just for him. It was to build a record of his experience, proof that he was being unjustly targeted. Mr. Cruz helped him organize the documents. Together, they went over every test score, every assignment, every lesson where Ms. Delgado had made him feel inferior or dismissed. The notes were meticulous, written with precision. Juan catalogued each instance where his contributions had been ignored, where his answers had been questioned, and where Ms. Delgado had made him feel like he didn't belong in the advanced class. It was grueling work, but Juan was determined. His mind was sharp, and the more he documented, the clearer it became. He was not the problem. It was the prejudice and bias that had clouded his teacher's judgment. One evening, after a particularly long session with Mr. Cruz, Juan found himself at the kitchen table with his mother, Luz. She was making dinner, as she always did after working her night shift at the hospital. The smell of garlic and onions filled the small apartment, a comforting scent that reminded Juan of everything his mother had sacrificed for him. "How was school today, Anak?" Luz asked, glancing up from the stove as she stirred the pan. Her tired smile warmed Juan's heart, but he could see the concern in her eyes. Juan hesitated for a moment before responding. He hadn't told her about the latest confrontation with Ms. Delgado yet. Luz had always been his rock, but this was different. His struggles were beginning to feel more like a personal battle, and he wasn't sure how much more his mother could take. "I'm okay, Mom. Just things are a little harder than usual," he said quietly, glancing down at the paper in front of him, where his notes on Ms. Delgado's behavior were neatly organized. Luz's hand paused in midair, her gaze softening as she put the spoon down. "You're fighting something bigger than a grade. I know that," she said, her voice filled with empathy. She walked over to him, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "But I want you to remember what your grandfather always said. Excellence is the best response to injustice. You don't have to prove anything to anyone but yourself. Keep working hard and let your brilliance speak for itself." Juan felt a wave of emotion wash over him. His mother had always taught him the value of dignity, perseverance, and excellence, even in the face of adversity. This was a lesson he had carried with him his entire life, and now it was more relevant than ever. "I'll do that, Mom," Juan said, his voice steady. "I'll keep proving myself, not for anyone else, but because it's who I am." Luz smiled at him, her face tired but full of pride. "That's my boy." The next day, Juan took another step forward. He registered for the upcoming regional math competition. It wasn't just about the competition itself, it was about proving his abilities on a larger stage. Juan had always dreamed of competing at a higher level, and this was his chance to show everyone, including Ms. Delgado, that his talent was undeniable. The registration process was straightforward, but the decision wasn't an easy one. Juan knew the competition would be fierce, and there was always the possibility that Ms. Delgado might try to sabotage his efforts. But his mother's words rang in his ears. Excellence is the best response to injustice. If he wanted to prove himself, this was his opportunity. As he filled out the registration form, Juan realized that he wasn't just doing this for himself. He was doing it for all the students who had been overlooked, who had been told they didn't belong. He was doing it for his mother, who had worked tirelessly to give him a shot at a better life. He was doing it to show that no one could define his future but him. Meanwhile, his study group continued to grow. After the first few weeks, Juan's friends began bringing in classmates from other years, many of whom were struggling with their own math courses. The group wasn't just limited to his friends anymore. It was becoming a community of students supporting one another. They weren't just working through problems. They were building something bigger, a space where anyone could learn, regardless of their background or perceived abilities. Realizing that many students couldn't attend the after-school sessions due to various commitments, Juan and his group decided to start recording tutorial videos. These videos would be accessible to everyone, even those who couldn't make it to the library or the classroom for the regular study sessions. The first video they recorded was on basic algebraic principles, a topic Juan had mastered early on. He explained the concepts clearly, breaking them down step by step. As the video was shared among classmates, it quickly became apparent that their efforts were having an impact. Students who had once struggled with even the simplest equations were now understanding them thanks to the tutorials. Juan's group grew stronger, not just in numbers but in spirit. They weren't just solving math problems. They were creating a movement, a network of students who were no longer afraid to challenge the system and stand up for each other. In a quiet corner of the classroom one afternoon, Maya turned to Juan, her eyes bright with admiration. "Juan, this is amazing. I can't believe how much we've learned and how many students are starting to join us." Juan smiled, feeling a sense of pride swell in his chest. This was only the beginning. The more they helped each other, the more they realized that education wasn't just about passing tests, it was about lifting others up. In the weeks leading up to the regional math competition, the atmosphere in the study group became more focused. Everyone was pushing themselves harder, working through problems late into the night. Juan knew that the competition was just the next step in proving himself, but he also knew that he had already achieved something far more meaningful. He had built a community of learners who would support one another no matter what. And that, he realized, was far more powerful than any grade or award. Juan's study group had become more than just a collection of students working together. It had evolved into a movement that was slowly but surely gaining the attention of Luntian High School's administration. As the weeks passed, the improvements in student performance, especially in math, were hard to ignore. The once struggling students in Juan's group were now consistently scoring higher on quizzes, their grades steadily improving, and more importantly, their confidence growing. Word about the study group's success spread beyond the walls of the school, reaching the ears of Principal Arnel Mendoza and other members of the school's leadership team. Principal Mendoza had always been a firm believer in fostering academic excellence, and when he saw the remarkable transformation taking place under Juan's leadership, he couldn't help but take notice. Not only was Juan excelling academically, but he had also become a beacon of community-driven success. The tutoring initiative had spread like wildfire across the school, with more and more students signing up for the sessions. But with this growing influence came new challenges. Ms. Delgado, whose initial disdain for Juan had been clear from the outset, began to react in more subtle, covert ways. Her hostility toward Juan didn't disappear. Instead, it simmered beneath the surface. While she no longer overtly confronted him in front of the class, there was a palpable tension in her presence whenever he spoke up or shared his ideas. Her eyes would narrow when he raised his hand, and there were times when she would intentionally dismiss his contributions, as if to remind him that she still held the reins of power in the classroom. Juan, however, remained unfazed. He had learned long ago that focus was his greatest asset. Despite the mounting pressure from Ms. Delgado, he continued to lead his study group with dedication and commitment. His grades never slipped, and he balanced his responsibilities with precision. Juan's focus was not just on his own academic success, but also on ensuring that his peers were empowered. He spent hours outside of class, coaching Maya and others, guiding them through difficult concepts and challenging them to push their limits. But the truth of his influence was becoming undeniable. The once fragmented group of struggling students was now a cohesive, thriving community, and their academic progress was beginning to make waves. Ms. Delgado's approach to grading became a point of concern. Her methods, once viewed as a hallmark of high standards, were now being questioned. There were murmurs among the faculty and students about possible biases in how she evaluated certain students, particularly those who were not part of the school's wealthier or more privileged demographic. As more and more students from Juan's group began to excel in their classes, concerns about grading disparities grew. Students like Juan, who had consistently earned perfect scores and shown exceptional mathematical skills, were not being rewarded in the same way as others. The questions about Ms. Delgado's grading practices became too significant to ignore. Students, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds, began to wonder if their hard work was being devalued due to subconscious biases. Seeing the writing on the wall, Principal Mendoza decided to intervene. He sent a team of observers, from the school board to observe Ms. Delgado's class, specifically to evaluate her grading methods and ensure that all students were being treated equitably. The observation was carefully planned, and though Ms. Delgado tried to maintain her usual authoritative demeanor, the presence of the observers added an element of scrutiny she hadn't anticipated. The day of the observation was tense. Juan sat quietly at his desk, acutely aware that his every move, every word he spoke would be under close watch. Ms. Delgado was more on edge than usual, perhaps sensing that the foundation beneath her authority was starting to shift. She carried on with the lesson, but the discomfort was palpable, both for her and the students who were becoming increasingly aware of the scrutiny. At the end of the day, Principal Mendoza called a meeting with Juan, Mr. Cruz, and the other key figures in the tutoring program. His face was serious, but there was an undeniable sense of respect in his eyes as he addressed Juan directly. "Juan," Principal Mendoza began, his voice steady but full of admiration, "I've been following the progress of your study group, and I want to commend you for your leadership. What you've done here is nothing short of remarkable. Your initiative has made a significant impact on student achievement, and the school administration recognizes that." Juan was taken aback. He had never imagined that his efforts would catch the attention of someone as important as the principal, let alone the entire school board, but he remained composed, listening intently. "We've also heard about the concerns regarding Ms. Delgado's grading practices," Principal Mendoza continued. "The school board has agreed that there needs to be independent grading for students like you, Juan, who have proven their exceptional skills. We will also be implementing additional oversight of the grading system to ensure that all students are given fair and equal opportunities." Juan felt a wave of relief wash over him. For the first time, he felt that the system was beginning to work in his favor, not just as an individual, but as someone fighting for something greater. Excellence, he realized, wasn't just about the grade on the paper. It was about pushing for change, making sure that the system recognized everyone's potential, regardless of background. Principal Mendoza's words were a turning point. "We're going to make sure that this school works for everyone," he said with conviction. "And Juan, you've shown us the way." Juan felt a sense of pride that he hadn't experienced before. Not only had he proven his worth in the classroom, but his actions had sparked change that would benefit everyone at Luntian High. Ms. Delgado's resistance hadn't stopped him, and now, with the school's administration backing him, he knew that he was no longer just a student in the background. He was a leader, a force for positive change. As he left the meeting, Juan couldn't help but smile. His journey was far from over, but it was clear now that his path was one of influence, of resilience, and above all, of excellence. And no one, not even Ms. Delgado, could take that away from him. A few days after the school board's intervention, Ms. Delgado requested a formal meeting with Juan, his mother Luz, Principal Mendoza, and Mr. Cruz. The invitation, delivered with an air of formality, was unexpected. Juan had thought that the confrontation in class and the subsequent investigation would lead to tension, perhaps even a breakdown of their relationship. However, he had no idea what Ms. Delgado intended to address in this meeting, though part of him feared it might be another attempt to undermine him. The meeting was held in the principal's office, a space that always seemed to carry a sense of finality, with its large desk and quiet atmosphere. Ms. Delgado arrived early, sitting at the far end of the room with her arms folded, her posture as rigid as ever. Principal Mendoza and Mr. Cruz entered shortly after, followed by Juan and his mother. Luz gave her son a reassuring smile as they took their seats. Juan could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew he had already won. He had fought for fairness and truth, and nothing could take that away. As the meeting began, Principal Mendoza wasted no time in addressing the purpose of the gathering. "Thank you all for being here. This meeting is to provide an opportunity for Ms. Delgado to speak and for us to discuss the next steps forward. I think we all agree that the most important thing is to ensure that our school provides the best education for every student regardless of background or circumstance. There was a brief pause before Ms. Delgado spoke, her voice quieter than usual. She took a deep breath, clearly struggling with the weight of the moment. "I'd like to start by offering my sincere apology to you, Juan, and to your mother," she said, her eyes meeting Juan's for the first time without the usual coldness. "I realize now that my behavior in class and my attitude toward you were wrong. I let my biases cloud my judgment and treated you unfairly." Juan felt a rush of mixed emotions. He had always known that Ms. Delgado harbored prejudices. Her treatment of him was proof of that. But hearing her admit it, seeing the vulnerability in her admission, was something he hadn't expected. "I didn't recognize the value of your contributions, Juan," she continued, her voice softening. "I thought that my way was the only way, and I ignored your potential. I deeply regret that. I have already made arrangements to undergo training on inclusive teaching practices to ensure this doesn't happen again. I realize now that I need to understand my students better, not just as learners, but as individuals with unique backgrounds and perspectives." Juan felt his heart ease, but he knew that her words, while important, were just the beginning. There was still work to be done. Principal Mendoza nodded in agreement. "Ms. Delgado has agreed to undergo this training, and we will continue to work closely with her to ensure the school's practices align with our values of fairness and equity," Mr. Cruz added. Juan's documented evidence and the feedback from students in the study group were crucial in bringing this issue to light. "It's important that we not only address this situation, but also use it as a learning experience for the whole school." The principal then turned to Juan. "I think it's important that we all recognize the role Juan has played in driving these changes. His leadership, his dedication to excellence, and his ability to maintain composure in the face of adversity have been nothing short of remarkable. We are committed to making sure this school environment fosters growth and opportunity for every student." Juan nodded, but his response was calm and clear. "I appreciate the apology, Ms. Delgado, but I want to make it clear that the focus should remain on improving the system for all students, not just me. It's about ensuring that everyone, no matter where they come from, has the chance to succeed, without fear of bias or unfair treatment." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. He wasn't interested in individual praise. What mattered was that the system changed, and that no student would ever have to face the kind of prejudice he had endured. Luz, his mother, placed a hand on Juan's arm, a proud smile on her face. "Juan is right. It's about the future. We all have a responsibility to make sure that no one else feels the way he did." The room fell into a reflective silence. Ms. Delgado, though clearly humbled by the meeting, nodded. "You're right, Juan. I will work on changing not only my teaching methods, but also my own understanding of fairness. Thank you for giving me the chance to correct my mistakes." As the meeting concluded, Principal Mendoza made it clear that the school's efforts to address these issues would continue. "We will be implementing a new system for independent grading, and will be providing additional training for all faculty members on how to recognize and address bias. This is just the beginning." Juan walked out of the principal's office, feeling a sense of closure. The apology was important, but more important was the commitment to change. He had never set out to seek retribution, but instead he had focused on the bigger picture, creating a better, more equitable educational environment for everyone. As he left with his mother by his side, he felt that the road ahead, while still challenging, was one that was now paved with the promise of progress. The day of the regional math competition arrived, and the nerves that had once threatened to overwhelm Juan were now a source of determination. His study group had practiced for weeks, every session focused not just on equations and formulas, but on the principles of focus, perseverance, and self-belief. He had earned his place at the competition not just through talent, but through tireless work and unwavering dedication. Juan stood at the front of the auditorium, surrounded by students from other schools, all eager to prove their abilities. The room was buzzing with nervous energy, but Juan felt a calm resolve settle within him. This was his moment, the culmination of everything he had worked for. The whispers of doubt from earlier in the year, the accusations of cheating, the subtle undermining from Miss Delgado, all seemed distant now. In their place was a quiet confidence. As the competition unfolded, Juan tackled each problem with ease, his mind moving through the questions like a well-oiled machine. The more difficult the problems became, the more focused he became. His hands moved swiftly across the paper, solving integrals, differential equations, and complex algebraic expressions with precision. When the final results were announced, it felt almost surreal. Juan won first place, a stunning victory that not only secured his spot in the national competition, but also earned the respect and admiration of everyone who had once doubted him. His heart raced as his name was called, and as he walked up to the stage to receive his award, he saw the faces of his classmates and teachers. There was pride in their eyes. Pride not just in his victory, but in what it represented. As Juan returned to his seat, he caught sight of his study group in the crowd. Maya, Michael, and the other members were beaming with pride. They had all supported him, and now it felt as if they had all won together. His success wasn't just his own. It was a victory for every student who had believed in the power of education, for every one of them who had refused to let bias and doubt define their future. The Reyes Tutoring Initiative, the peer-led tutoring program Juan had started, was officially recognized by the school board. Inspired by Juan's leadership and his group's success, the school board decided to formalize the program. It was no longer just a small after-school study group. It became a school-wide initiative, offering support across multiple subjects, from mathematics to science to the humanities. What had started as a handful of students helping each other had now blossomed into something far more impactful, a community-driven educational model that would support students of all backgrounds, ensuring that no one was ever left behind. The school's decision to officially launch the Reyes Tutoring Initiative was a proud moment for Juan, but it also signified a major shift in the school's approach to education. Students no longer had to feel isolated in their struggles. Now there was a network of peers ready to help them succeed. The legacy of Juan's efforts was now woven into the fabric of the school. A few weeks later, a special assembly was held in Juan's honor. Principal Mendoza stood at the podium, his face glowing with pride as he addressed the gathered students, teachers, and parents. Today, we celebrate not just the academic achievement of one of our brightest students, but also the power of community, leadership, and resilience. Juan Reyes has shown us what it means to lead by example, to never back down in the face of adversity, and to always strive for excellence. His tutoring initiative has transformed this school, and his victory in the regional competition is a testament to what can be accomplished when we work together. The applause that followed was deafening. Juan stood there, humbled by the attention, but he could hear the voices of his study group cheering the loudest. He knew they were the ones who had helped him get here. This victory wasn't just his. It was a shared triumph, a product of their collective hard work. As the assembly drew to a close, Juan took a moment to reflect. The quiet student who had once doubted his place in the classroom had been transformed. He had gone from a person who worked in the shadows, uncertain of his abilities, to a confident leader who had not only excelled, but had also changed the very system that had once sought to limit him. Juan stood at the front of the room, smiling, his heart full. He had fought for fairness, for himself, for his peers, and in doing so, he had found his true voice. This was just the beginning. The road ahead was still long, with national competitions on the horizon and new challenges to face. But Juan knew one thing for sure: he was ready. The triumph wasn't just about the medal or the recognition. It was about the power of education to break down barriers and how together people could change the world. Juan looked over at his mother, Luz, seated in the front row. She gave him a proud smile, and he knew that this victory was not just his, but theirs. Every late night, every sacrifice, every struggle had led to this moment, and now, as he stood at the threshold of something even greater, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for his mother, his mentors, and his friends. Together, they had made a difference, and this was only the beginning. As the school year drew to a close, Juan found himself sitting by the window of his modest apartment, staring out at the city of Manila, the evening lights flickering like a million possibilities. The breeze, warm but tinged with the promise of change, blew through the open window, bringing with it the sounds of the bustling streets below. His mind, however, was far from the noise of the city. He was deep in thought, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here, the path he had taken, the struggles he had faced, and the victories he had achieved. Juan's victory in the regional math competition, the official launch of the Reyes tutoring initiative, and the profound changes at Luntian High were milestones he would never forget. But as he looked back, he realized that it wasn't just his academic accomplishments that had shaped him. It was the lessons he had learned through adversity, through standing up for what was right, and through the unwavering support of his family and community. The first lesson that came to mind was perseverance. No matter the obstacles, Juan had kept pushing forward. There had been moments when he doubted himself, when the weight of prejudice felt suffocating. But each time he faced a setback, whether it was Ms. Delgado's hostility or the doubts of his classmates, he had refused to give up. Instead, he had used each challenge as fuel to keep going, determined to prove that his worth was not defined by anyone else's bias. The second lesson was dignity. Throughout every confrontation, every unfair accusation, and every moment of doubt, Juan had chosen to respond with grace. When Ms. Delgado had accused him of cheating, he had remained calm and composed, explaining his work with clarity and precision. He had never let anger cloud his judgment or his actions. Instead, he had demonstrated that dignity in the face of adversity was the most powerful weapon he had. And in doing so, he had inspired others to do the same. And then there was excellence. Juan's journey had taught him that excellence wasn't just about achieving high grades or winning competitions. It was about constantly striving to be better, to push the boundaries of what was possible, and to bring others along on the journey. Excellence, he realized, was about making a difference, not just in his own life, but in the lives of those around him. As Juan looked back on his family's sacrifices, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. His mother, Luz, had worked tirelessly for years, enduring long shifts at the hospital, all so that Juan could have the opportunity to attend Luntian High. She had believed in him when no one else did, reminding him that education was the key to breaking the cycle of poverty. Her sacrifices, her love, and her unshakable faith in him had given him the strength to continue, even when the road seemed impossible. He could never repay her for everything she had done, but he promised himself that he would make her proud, not just through his achievements, but by helping others achieve their dreams as well. Now, with the Reyes tutoring initiative officially recognized and expanding across the school, Juan felt a sense of pride in how far they had come. The initiative had given students from all backgrounds the opportunity to succeed, to overcome the barriers that had once held them back. What started as a small study group had transformed into a school-wide movement, one that was making a tangible difference in the lives of students who, like him, had once been overlooked or dismissed. Juan's vision for the future was clear. He was determined to continue his journey, not just for his own benefit, but for the benefit of others. The barriers he had faced, the prejudice, the doubts, the obstacles, were not just personal challenges to overcome. They were a call to action. He would continue to help others break down their own barriers, showing them that with hard work, determination, and support, anything was possible. Juan knew that the road ahead would not be easy. His dreams of attending university, of one day becoming a mathematician, were just beginning to take shape. But he was no longer the quiet student who had once doubted his place in the world. He had found his voice, his purpose, and his path forward. And as he looked toward his university ambitions, he realized that he was not just pursuing his own future. He was helping to build a better future for everyone at Luntian High. The future was bright, and Juan was ready for whatever it held. As he stood by the window gazing at the city beyond, he felt a surge of hope. He had fought for a better world, and now, with his family, his mentors, and his peers by his side, he was ready to take the next step. This was only the beginning. The best was yet to come.